Good morning, good evening to everyone. We'll get started shortly. Yeah, so just we'll wait for a few more people to kind of join in and then I'll get started.
Good morning and welcome, everyone.
Great. Since it's 11:05, I think we can get started. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us from wherever you're calling from. My name is Shashank. I'm a member of the Vimarsha Academia team, and I'm very happy to introduce today's speaker for our Hindu Studies lecture series. Dr. Gavin Flood is a professor of Hindu Studies and Comparative Religion in the Theology and Religion faculty at the University of Oxford and academic director of the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies. Professor Flood read religious studies and social anthropology at Lancaster University and taught at the universities of Wales, Lampeter, and Stirling before coming to Oxford. He was elected to the membership of the British Academy in 2014. His research interests include medieval Hindu texts, especially from the traditions of Shiva, comparative religion, and phenomenology. Developing from the comparative interests of these books, he is currently working on a project on holiness as well as developing closer textual work on a Sanskrit text called the Netratantra. He's also the general series editor of the Oxford History of Hinduism. In today's talk, he'll be examining the notion of bhāvabheda, types of being in the Netratantra, as a resource for thinking about ontological pluralism and its applications in contemporary life. As with our previous talks, the speaker will give their presentation, and that will be followed by 30 minutes of Q&A. Please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A box, and I will read them out for you. We look forward to a lively discussion, and with that, I will hand it over to Professor Flood to begin. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Shashank. Thank you for a generous introduction. My apologies to everyone in advance because I picked up a cold yesterday, and so if I'm a bit croaky, that's the reason why. Now, thank you all for coming to hear about the Netratantra. So today I'm going to start by telling you about the text, what it is and where it's from and that kind of thing, and then excuse me, and then present to you a few quotes from the text about this term bhāvabheda, which is particularly interesting within the was particularly interesting and it's throughout the Netratantra. It's a term which occurs frequently throughout that text. And basically, what I want to say is that it seems to denote a kind of pluralist ontology. And then I want to raise some questions with you towards the end about some philosophical questions about the philosophical coherence of a pluralist ontological view, and whether the Netratantra has anything interesting to say to us today, as it were. So that's the kind of sketch of what I want to talk about. So um, now you probably all know this, but there's no harm in repeating it a bit that in the Middle Ages, say from the 7th to the 13th century, say 7th to 8th centuries, say, or ninth century, you've got the development of the Tantric tradition. So Alexis Sanderson has called this between the 7th and the 13th century the Śaiva age. We could call it the Tantric age, it seems to me. And then with the rise of the Delhi Sultanate and the rise of the Mughal Empire, those Tantric kingdoms go down, they decline. And so that's the end of the Shaiva age, as it were, and the end of the Tantric age. And this was a civilization in a way which stretched from Kashmir to Khmer to Cambodia. Uh, and there was a kind of a certain coherence to it, a ritual coherence. I think it was united by a ritual pattern as well as a textual transmission. Now, Alexis Anderson has mapped out uh, the self-understanding of the Tantric Shaiva tradition into these three categories: the higher path, or the Ati-marga, or the outer path, the mantra marga, the Tantric path, the path of mantras, and the goddess path, the Kula marga. So what we mean by Tantric Shaivism is the mantra marga. That is Tantric Shaivism. And the text I'm going to be speaking about, the Netratantra, is within this context of Tantric Shaivism. Now, just to sketch this out, if this is new to you, the Ati-marga, the higher path, was a path of Shaiva ascetics, particularly a sect called the Pashupatas, who became very successful in India during this time. And Somnath, the great temple in Gujarat, on the coast, was a Pashupata temple, which was sacked by Mahmud of Ghazni in 1026. Now, they were a powerful organization with land and they were an institution. So the Ati-marga, I think we need to think of the Pashupatas as an institution rather than simply a bunch of ascetics. Because when you read the text, you wonder how on earth these people could organize anything. But there must have been a set of people who organized things and ran the show, as well as the ascetics who were announcers. And Alexis has divided this into three phases of the Ati-marga, 1, 2, and 3. The Pashupatas, who were ascetics and who have their own texts, and who cover themselves in the ashes, in cow dung ash, so they were pure. And they call themselves the higher path because they transcended the 4 ashramas, the 4 stages of the Vedic path. They went beyond that. They considered themselves as going beyond that 4 stages of the Vedic path. So a higher revelation, a higher way of being, and a higher liberation. So there was the various other. The Ati-marga too was focused on La Kulisha, the lord of the club, and Ati-marga 3 was a Karpalika tradition. Now, we don't have any texts from these, from the Ati-marga 3, the Karpalika tradition, but that reinvented itself within the Ati-marga. So it's a bit complicated, but that's the general position that Alexis has mapped out in his publications. Now, the Tantric path, the mantra marga, the main tradition here is the Shaiva Siddhanta, the orthodox doctrine of Shiva. Now, the Shaiva Siddhanta grew out of the Pashupata tradition. And the earliest Tantra that we have, the Nishvasa Tattva Samhita, contains much Ati-marga 1 doctrine and practices. So that's the earliest Tantra we have. And then there's a whole canon after that of Shaiva Siddhanta texts, the Mrigendragama and the Parakya Samhita and all of these texts, the ones that Dominic Goodall has edited and translated, and his team in Pondicherry, all the Shaiva Siddhanta canon. Excuse me. So you've got the Ati-marga tradition, which isn't technically tantric. You've got the tantric path, the mantra marga of the Shaiva Siddhanta, which is the backbone of the tantric tradition, if you like. And their whole canon of revelation, this new revelation which is coming out from the 7th century roughly, although elements of the Nishvasa are 5th century, which is pretty early. So there's an explosion of texts, and within about 7 generations, you've got this whole new canon of literature has developed. Now, the Shaiva Siddhanta aligned itself with Vedic tradition. It regarded itself as pure because it offers pure offerings to Shiva in the form of Sadashiva. And reacting against that, you have another tradition, which is the non-Siddhantika traditions, the non-Siddhanta traditions, which instead of focusing on Sadashiva, the gentle Saumya Sadashiva, worshipped the Ugra, worshipped the ferocious Bhairava. And these had their own texts, their own tantras. And one of the traditions which you've probably heard of was the Trika within this non-Siddhantika tradition. And it's theologically or philosophically articulated in the recognition school, the Pratyabhijñā, of which the Abhinavagupta and Kṣemarāja are fine exemplars of that philosophical articulation. Now, so that's the general picture. So you've got the Shaiva Siddhanta dualist tradition, says there's an ontological, eternal ontological distinction between God, self, and world. The Trika and the non-Siddhantika traditions, which say actually there's only one pure consciousness, supreme consciousness, Parachaitanya, that God, self, and world are identical with. And there are kind of two versions of this. One is an emanationism, that the world and the universe and people, beings, living beings, are emanations of that pure consciousness. And another version that there's the absolute identity with them. So they're slightly, subtly different positions, those. That the abhasa, the appearance of the world is pure consciousness. So the notion of emanation implies a subtle distinction, perhaps, between what is emanated and that from which it is emanated. But we can perhaps talk about that in the discussion. Now there's a third path, the Kula Marga, the path of the family of goddesses, the Kula, the family of goddesses. And there was various sects or traditions. The Krama is an important one, which was deeply influential on the non-Siddhantika traditions. Kṣemarāja and Abhinavagupta were deeply influenced by the Krama and initiated into this esoteric tradition. And Kṣemarāja says the Krama is the heart of the Shaiva tradition. Even Shiva doesn't know that his esoteric heart is the goddess, Kala Sankarshini, the destroyer of time, or the one who pulls you into her self. Now the Netratantra is kind of between these traditions, between the path of mantras and the Kula Marga, in a sense. It describes itself as a universal revelation. So it wants to place itself outside of this classification. It wants to place itself as a universal tradition, which in a sense transcends all of these because it is inclusive. It's an inclusive hierarchy. It wants to embrace all of these traditions within it. And it was very popular in the Kashmir Valley from probably composed about the 8th century, probably in Kashmir, according to Alexis, for various reasons. He's written a paper on this, like iconography and various other reasons. And it became popular. There is some and the main focus of the text is the Netranātha, the Lord of the Eye, and also Amṛteśa, the Lord of Immortality. And there are iconographic representations of Amṛteśa. Now, it went to Nepal, and it was copied for Abhaya one of the first Malla king of Nepal, by Kirtidara in the year 1200. And we have the earliest manuscript of the text, the earliest surviving manuscript of the text is the one copied by Kirtidara in the spring of 1200. Now, so that is the text that my colleague and I, Bjarne Veronica Olsen, have done an edition of that text, and that's the version that we've used, the Nepali version. We haven't used the Kashmir ones. All of the Kashmir versions there are 4 versions to my knowledge in Kashmir, and they all contain the commentary by Kṣemarāja. The Nepalese text doesn't have Kṣemarāja's commentary. So the Netratantra, the scripture of the eye, is what I'm going to be speaking about with you today. Sorry, I've gone on a bit. I didn't realize the time. Now, I want to speak about the term bhāvabheda in this text. Now, there's two words, bhava, being, and bhava with a long R. There's a whole history of that, of course, in the history of philosophy in India. Bhava being, it's a deep concern of Indian thinking, as it was for Heidegger, the notion of being what is being, bhava, from bhu to be. And bhava, excuse me, comes to mean later on emotion or attitude or sentiment. So we got these ideas, the sthayi bhavas, the dominant emotion in Vaishnava theology later on. And bhāvabheda, the term bhāvabheda, can thus be differentiation, bheda, difference or distinction or differentiation, according to emotional state or attitude. So we've got this ambiguity, really. Does the term bhāvabheda mean a distinction in ways of being of the God or the cosmos? Is it an objective categorization, or is it a subjective categorization, or is it a bit of both? So that's the kind of question. Does bhāvabheda refer to distinctions of bhavas, of categories of being, the ontic categories of being, the tattva hierarchy, for example, or does it refer to one's own personal inclination, how you approach divinity, what your orientation is towards, what your longing is towards transcendence? So or is it both? Now, here's a quote from the text. This is from 854. So he, the yogi, becomes equal to the Lord of immortality, the conqueror of death, Mrityunjay. These are all names of the focus of the deity in the Netratantra, O goddess. This is Shiva speaking to the goddess. So he, the yogi, becomes equal to the Lord of immortality, the conqueror of death, O goddess, without doubt, by whatever method he may recall, whatever upaya, whatever method he may bring to mind. By that method, the yogi becomes the conqueror of time, or the conqueror of death, or by whatever observance in which he is established. So that's very interesting. So you become free, you become liberated by whatever method you follow, by whatever your path is. By whatever practice, by whatever division of its being, or whatever his proclivity of feeling, by whatever bhāvabhedena, by whatever bhāvabheda the yogi follows, the yogi attains success by that method. And that one meditated in different ways, O goddess, truly bestows perfection. So you've got these different bhāvabhedas, and you become liberated by that. And what is becoming liberated here is becoming equal to the Lord of immortality. Now, there's an ambiguity here, because in the Śaiva Siddhanta, liberation is equal to Shiva, is Shiva Tulya. But you nevertheless retain an ontological distinction from Shiva. Whereas in the non-Siddhantika traditions, you become the same as Shiva. You become samarasya, the sameness of flavor. There's an identity with Shiva. So it's not that there is lots of different Shivas in the state of liberation. For the non-Siddhantika traditions, you become one with Shiva. For the Śaiva Siddhanta, you retain an ontological identity, but become equal to Shiva. Now, the Netratantra is ambiguous about this point. So it's not precisely clear, it seems to me, which one it goes for. I think it tends to be non-dualistic, but nevertheless, I think there's this ambiguity. So there's the text. So prakarena, by whatever kind of prakara, whatever way or form, method, samsmari, one should visualize or bring to mind. So Kṣemarāja glosses this bhāvabhedena by the phrase etat. Sorry, I've got a misspelling there. It's tattva, that's supposed to be. Tattva Nishta, Bhavana, Visheshana. So by means of the specific cultivation of the Bhavana, focus on the ontic category or focused to reality, the Nishta, which is established in or focused on the Tattva of that. Oh, sorry, no, it is correct. Sorry, it isn't. It's not Tattva. It is. Sorry, I have spelled it correctly there. Yeah. So Tattva. Does it mean reality here, or does it mean the ontic categories, the tattvas? So the different visualizations in the text are cultivation that focuses on a tattva, on a level of reality. Now, the Netratantra has different chapters on different visualizations of deities. So you've got Sadashiva, the gentle Sadashiva of the Śaiva Siddhanta, you visualize him. Bhairava, the ferocious Bhairava with bulging eyes, you visualize him. Or the goddess, you visualize the goddess. Or you visualize Kuleshvara with Kuleshvari, the lord of the family of goddesses with his consort Kuleshvari, who is with an enormous stomach and who's really unpleasant to look at, and she's holding a bag of entrails. So you've got this ugra, this ferocious side here coming in with the Netratantra. Or you visualize Tumburu with his sisters, or you visualize Vaishnava deities, you visualize Krishna, you visualize Narayana, you visualize the Buddha even. So all of these are bhāvabhedas, all of these are paths to enlightenment, are paths to take you to Shiva, or take you to the Lord of immortality. Now, this understanding is reinforced throughout the text in the next chapter, which opens as follows. I have heard, or chapter 9 rather, I have heard about the great system, this is the goddess speaking, I have heard about the great system of mantra in its entirety, O God. Now I want to hear about that which is taught to me by the Lord, how he bestows success through the divisions of its being, bhāvabhedena, which are the prescriptions of all the scriptural traditions, namely the left, right, Siddhanta, Saura, Vaishnava, and Vaidika traditions. So the law bestows siddhi, bestows accomplishment, success, and indeed enlightenment and liberation through these different bhāvabhedas. And here it lists them. The bhāvabhedas are the left hand, the right, the Siddhanta, the Saura, the Vaishnava, and Vaidika. And all these are streams of revelation. So there are these 5 streams of revelation flowing out of the absolute reality that it describes as bhāvabhedas. And then she goes on, explain, O Lord of the gods, that divine reality that bestows success just as one desires, by use of whatever system of practice one desires, like the fruit of a wish-fulfilling gem. So, which gives siddhidam, which bestows accomplishments, as whatever practice, the ishta achara, yogata, by whatever practice, from whatever achara, which is ishta, which is chosen, your chosen path, will lead you to the absolute reality. So it's a very inclusive scripture. So for Kṣemarāja, the bhāvabheda here refers to these streams of revelation. So you've got the left-hand stream, which is Tumburu and his sisters. Now, that's interesting because Tumburu is he's often depicted as there's a line of sure I should have showed you a picture of this, but there's a line of goddesses, 7 saptamartikas, top and tail by Tumburu and Vinayaka either side. And he's named, but he's not very important. What's important are his 4 sisters. So they're the ones that are the focuses of visualization in this left-hand revelation, this left current. The right-hand current is from Bhairava, and chapter 10 is all about the visualization of Bhairava. And then the Siddhanta chapter is Sadashiva, the gentle Sadashiva. And these three traditions comprise the mantra marga. These are the mantra marga for this text. And there's the Kula marga as well, which isn't classified here in this particular list. So the others are the Sun, the Saura, the Vaishnava, and the Vaidika. Now there's a hierarchy of revelation, and it seems to be the mantra marga is the highest, with the Netratantra itself, which embraces all traditions, as at the top. Now we also get in an earlier chapter, chapter 3, we get one should meditate upon the deity, excuse me, according to the divisions of being, as the wish-fulfilling gem, distinguished by its mode as gentle, savage, fearful, or deformed. Those forms are Sadashiva, Bhairava, Tumburu, and Viranayaka. Then whatever form the practitioner meditates upon, he goes to that. He goes to that. The Lord is attained, as it were, like a wish-fulfilling gem. Having visualized in this way, he should worship the Shining One with beautiful mental flowers in the lotus of the heart for the purpose of all accomplishments. After that, he should worship externally. So again, an interesting passage. So you've got these deities, and whatever form that you meditate on, you go to that world, you go to that reality. Excuse me, like a wish-fulfilling gem. And then you do that in your mental worship, the standard tantric practice of visualizing the deity in your mind, and then doing puja to the deity in an external form. So the manasa yaga, or the antara yaga, followed by the bahya yaga, the outer form. Just standard tantric puja. So anything I want to bring your attention to here, you've got this in the handout. No, I don't think so, particularly. So, yeah, Padme in the Lotus of the Heart. So the term bhāvabheda, but Kṣemarāja also takes the term not only to refer to those streams of revelation. So it's not only an objective order. If the streams of revelation are an objective order that bhāvabheda refers to, for Kṣemarāja it also refers to the subjective state of the practitioner. So he glosses Viranayaka as Kuleshvara, the lord of the goddesses, the lord of the family of goddesses, the deity of the Kula tradition, which is a Shakta revelation. And each of the divisions being gracious images that have appeared, whose variegated distinctions are for the different natures of practitioners. So all these different forms, the ferocious forms, the gentle forms, and so on, they're all for the different natures of people, for people's different inclinations, people's different proclivities. So it's very individualistic. Now it's not a cultural value of individualism, but nevertheless it's individualistic in a different kind of sense, depending on your preference, on your proclivity, on your orientation as a person. So he says in the commentary, by whatever form the practitioner constantly worships, like a wish-fulfilling gem, the Lord takes on that form for him. So God takes on the form that you want. So, yeah, so the sadhaka, the practitioner, should bring to mind the Lord always with that form, by whatever form. And then Yati, he goes to that, Mayatam, he goes to that. He goes to that being which then comprises that being. He becomes identical, if you like, with that reality. of that Lord, of that being. So it's interesting that it uses the verb yati, goes to, he goes. Now, Kṣemarāja also suggests that the different modalities or streams of revelation depend upon the choice or desire of the practitioner. So it's not simply the tradition you're born into, it's also your desire, also your choice. So each of the streams of revelation is a preferred practice, an ishta-achara. So this idea of proclivity of persons is close to the later concept of personal emotions transformed. So in the Vaishnava tradition, for example, your sthayi bhava, you transform your basic emotion into an aesthetic spiritual emotion as the form within which you worship Krishna. Now, Kṣemarāja also connects the word bhāvabheda with relation, sambandha. So you have a cause, Shiva, and you have an appearance, an abhasa. So the Shiva is the hetu, the cause of the abhasa, of the appearance. And he identifies abhasa with bhāvabheda. So the relation between the appearance, the abhasa, or the bhāvabheda, and Shiva is that Shiva is the cause of that. So Shiva is the cause of the bhāvabheda or the abhasa, and that there's a relation between them. Now, it seems to me that at one level, this is a pluralist ontology that the Netratantra is presenting to us. And it's pluralist in the sense of a hierarchical inclusivism. Now, I say that with slight hesitation because on the one hand, in the passages we've just seen, it seems to say that whatever path you choose, that leads to liberation, whether it's the ferocious form of Bhairava, the gentle form of Sadashiva, the goddess, and so on. They all deliver accomplishment, siddhi, power, and they all deliver liberation. In another way, the text seems to be indicating, and this is what Kṣemarāja picks up, the text seems to be indicating a hierarchy of beings and a hierarchy of levels of reality with its own all-embracing level at the very top of that hierarchy of forms. And that is also true in a sister or cousin text, the Svachanda Tantra, which is an inclusive hierarchy. In the chapter on the Bhuvanadvan, the hierarchy of worlds, it's got this very specific layers, up the ladder, if you like, to the supreme consciousness at the top. And Kṣemarāja articulates this hierarchical inclusivism in his summary of recognition philosophy, the Pratyabhijñā. He says all the systems of philosophy are states that are different levels of that supreme self, or different roles, bhumika. I often wonder, bhumika, I think it can also mean an actor in a play. So I wonder if that is echoing in that term there as well. So the last 5 minutes, is the Netratantra ontologically pluralist? Is the question I want to raise with you. And is that therefore, if it is ontologically pluralist, is that against Kṣemarāja's reading? Because Kṣemarāja, I think he's really an emanationist. He really wants to maintain that Parachaitanya is the supreme absolute at the top of the hierarchy of levels. All the other revelations, the streams of revelation, the Vaidika, the Saura, so on, are arranged under that. So it's hierarchically inclusivist. And he reads the Netratantra as a hierarchically inclusivist text. But could it be genuinely ontologically pluralist? That there's an ontological pluralism encompassed here as different worlds that are distinct, although not unrelated to each other. So it's a hypothesis that the Netratantra and those who composed it were ontological pluralists. That it incorporates different systems, including more ecstatic Shakta traditions. You've certainly got ecstasy in the tradition, in the text, and which is ecstatics, inner states, indicated through, like when you're initiated into the Shakta tradition, through trembling and states of possession. So you're supposed to display these states. And there are several chapters on yoginis. And it seems to be influenced by the Krama tradition, the Chid Gagana, the sky of consciousness, and you become a Kshemarāja, a mover in the sky of consciousness. And the yoginis are quite big in chapter 20 and chapter 19 and other later chapters. And chapter 6 is about appeasing the yoginis, because you don't want them. They make you sick, and they make your children ill and all this, and you want to keep them out. You want to employ a mantrin who gives you a mantra, who you employ, who keeps away these forces from your life. Interesting, chapter 20 of the Netratantra says, although they might kill you and destroy you, in fact, the truth is that they're sent by Shiva and they're liberating you. You become a pashu, you become a sacrificial victim to Shiva, which is also a liberation. So it's a very interesting, hidden away in that chapter 20. You get this interesting theology of sacrifice, of the yogini cult. So on the one hand, we've got, within this text, you've got formal Vedika worship, which seems to lead you to liberation. On the other, the cult of the yoginis and their pacification. And chapter 18, you also have a black magic chapter, which is expurgated from the Kashmir recension. It's not in the Kashmir edition, it's only in the Nepalese version. And this is how to destroy your enemies through black magic, you take bats' wings and crows' wings and you burn them in the fire. Actually, I think you stick them up your backside first and then you burn them in the fire and you identify them with your enemy, and that will destroy your enemy. So you can understand how these were attractive to kings. But it's interesting that the Kashmir version strips out that chapter on black magic. Now, we can read the Netratantra as ontologically pluralist, certainly at one level, perhaps even ultimately ontologically pluralist. And what's the relationship between these different worlds? Now, I want to leave you in a sense with the question, is the relationship analogical, or what Chris McDaniel calls prosen equivocal? Now, what does that mean, prosen? That's a Greek from Aristotle 2:1. Chris McDaniel is a philosopher. He wrote a book called Fragments of Being, and he's an ontological pluralist. So he presents arguments for ontological pluralism. And I'm wondering if we can read the Netratantra in the lens of this ontological pluralism. And prosen equivocation means that he is from Aristotle, but that being can be said in many ways. Being can be said in many ways. Now, maybe for our Netratantra, being can be said in many ways, but more than that, being can be practiced in many ways, and liberation, the path to liberation, can be practiced in many ways. So for McDaniel, prosen equivocation means that entities have what he calls focal meaning, and that means that something has several senses. So one thing has different senses. Now, I think in our Netratantra, we could say that reality is plural and has different senses or different ways of being within it. This is a quote from McDaniel. Each of these different senses, each one of which is to be understood in terms of some central meaning of that expression, So I think we can certainly see the Netratantra in those terms, but I wonder if we can also see it more radically as actually that these different worlds are distinct worlds that it's positing. I think probably the Netratantra is prose and equivocal, but I do wonder if it is more than that. If there's simply an analogy between these different worlds, these different goals that it's speaking about, and that diverse worlds, what they do share is a common denominator, but that common denominator perhaps isn't some supreme reality, but is human beings within the world. Now take away that notion of parachaitanya as the ground of all of them, and you have in the text, and you do have a genuine pluralism, perhaps. So perhaps we could develop a thesis that there's an ontological pluralism in the text, but the text is also united by a common view of human qualities. So the practitioners, those who practice, share certain qualities. We share a common human nature. But that reality, through these different practices, through these different acharas, opens up onto distinct ontological realities. So you go yati, one goes to that world that you focus on in your meditation, in your being, in your practice. So there's a shared human capacity for practice and a potential for liberation and accomplishment, but all that depends upon we all end up in different places depending upon what we focus upon. So I do wonder, it's at one level that seems to be the model promoted by the Netratantra, but it seems that also, like in chapter 8, it has this different view that the supreme consciousness, parachaitanya, is the umbrella which embraces them all. So questions, which I'll leave you with. Is the Netratantra theologically coherent? And does it need to be theologically coherent? Are we projecting something onto it in our need for it to be theologically coherent? And does the Netratantra, perhaps this is of interest to us, does it have any contemporary relevance? Is it of only historical interest, I mean, or does it speak to us today? Does it speak to us perhaps in terms of ontological pluralism and therefore tolerance? And does it speak to us in terms of human concerns, that it is concerned with human welfare? It wants people to lead successful lives. It wants families to be successful and for the kids not to get ill. So there's a lot about prescriptions of to protect your kids from fever and this sort of thing in a time where they didn't know about the etiology of disease, and a time before modern medicine. So it does express deep human concerns, but it also expresses this kind of ontological pluralism, both of which there are lessons that we can learn today, it seems to me. So that's the end, and there's our text. Om Namah Shivadibhyo Gurubhyaha. So thank you for your attention, and I've been speaking for about 40 minutes, I think. I've lost track of the time. So we've got about 15 minutes probably for conversation.
Yeah. So thank you to Professor Flood for that wonderful presentation. We'll now begin the Q&A. I have a few questions that have come from different places. Uh, and the first one I have is from Ravi Kudesia, who's on the Vimarsha team, and he's unfortunately not able to be with us today. But his question is, as someone who's been a longtime scholar of Tantra and Shaivism, I wanted to ask your bigger picture perspective on the evolving process of scholarship. It seems like foundational scholars in the field, like yourself and Alexis Sanderson, emphasize focusing strictly on text without saying too much about lived practice. There is now a growing trend towards scholars doing ethnographic work and studying practice alongside texts. A few people go further and even seek to portray themselves as teachers of Tantric practices based on their academic qualifications rather than any authority within the living lineages. Can you share with us your perspective about the pros and cons of various ways of engaging with practice as a scholar? What is most helpful and what do you think goes too far?
Well, that's a great question. Well, I'm honored to be lined up with Alexis. Alexis is a Mahadeva. He's an exceptional person and an exceptional scholar who reads 7 years studying with Lakshmanju and reading. He reads from manuscript sources as if they were reading the newspaper or something. So uh, he's opened up this whole field for us, and um, and his mapping of the traditions, um, I think is interesting, and maybe it's open to modification, but I think it's probably more or less right. And also, he sees himself as a scientist who offers a hypothesis and is open to falsification. So that like the model of the three paths, the Kulamarga, the Mantramarga, and the Atimarga. That's a model that's an emic understanding of from the texts themselves, which he's presenting in an etic way, if you like. That's my version, but which is open to falsification. So yes, Alexis is purely a textual scholar, and that's his historical mapping of the tradition from practice. Now he might say, he probably would, I'm a historian. I'm not interested in contemporary practice. I'm interested in the history of the tradition and how it evolves, and it's what it says about the world and the reality in it. So if you ask Alexis, perhaps, do you think that contemporary practice can tell us anything about history? He might be skeptical of that. Personally, I'm not. I think that contemporary practice can tell us a lot about what happens in the text. I remember reading some text and then finding a contemporary practice, which is about blocking the nose, a pranayama practice. And having known that, I could then understand what the text was saying. If I hadn't known that, I would have been puzzled by what on earth it was talking about. So I think contemporary practices, which have very often been passed down through the generations, can indeed inform our understanding of the text. So I suppose that's one point. And indeed, the Tantric Studies series that I edit had that view that anthropology and ethnography can tell us something about what these ancient texts are saying, as well as the other way around. So I think that addresses some. So yeah, so there is a pure historical understanding of text, which Alexis takes, I think. I think that contemporary practice and contemporary ethnography can illuminate the historical material. And then you've also simply got studies of fieldwork now, like my student Shāvi Maheshwari, she's working in Nepal, pure ethnography, incredible ethnography she's doing there of these Navadurga dances and so on. So yes, I think that's right. There's been a shift to contemporary understandings of tantric traditions, and that's a notable, and it's a welcome shift. I think it's really important that this has happened and this is happening, and that the textual traditions can inform the ethnography. Now, the third thing there was the scholar practitioner. My own view is I'm still a bit old-fashioned. I think that as long as you know what you're doing, who cares what you do with your interiority or your privacy? But I live amongst Jesuits in Campion Hall in Oxford. And we often have this conversation with my Jesuit colleagues who think that being a Jesuit is important because you present arguments, theological arguments about the understanding of the tradition. Now, there is a place for that within the tantric traditions. You could be a theologian, a tantric theologian, and present arguments for a particular position within that tradition. Why not? But I think you've got to be aware of what you're doing, as long as you know that you're doing that, and you don't get it mixed up with textual and historical work, because it can cloud your vision. I think it can cloud your history. I mean, I don't think you, can you be uh, I mean, okay, I was a conversation not too long ago with Vedic mathematics. What's Vedic mathematics? Surely you've just got mathematics, um, or your Catholic history. Surely you've just got history, and um, you've got good history and less good history, seems to me. Sorry, I went on a bit there.
No, it's a fascinating set of questions, and I think it definitely bears more discussion. But I do want to be able to get to other people's questions, since there's a few of them. I have a question from Elisa Freschi, uh, uh, asking, I understand that and I think this is the Netratantra's view, is a pluralistic soteriology, but why a pluralistic theology or ontology?
Oh, that's an interesting distinction. Yes, it's pluralistic soteriology, and I think. Well, I'm positing this as a question because simply because the passages which say you become that whatever your the object, whatever bhāvabheda it is, whatever the object of your meditation, I'm suggesting that perhaps suggests an ontological pluralism as well. There are other chapters like chapter 8 that seems not to say that seem to be ontologically non-dualistic, monistic, but perhaps soteriologically pluralist. But I'm wondering if there's an alignment between this soteriological pluralism and an ontological pluralism. And I'm positing that because it's a what got me thinking about that only fairly recently was some anthropologists from 10 or more years ago, Vimarsha Castro, Marilyn Strathern, and these others, who posited an ontological pluralism from their work, mostly amongst them, Amazonian tribes, but Amazonian people. And I've started to think about that and taking that seriously, that maybe the composers of at least parts of the Netratantra were indeed taking seriously ontological pluralism, and that as our Vaisheshika philosophers did. Um, and I'm wondering why that can't be. It goes against the grain of much of our thinking, but and perhaps even our intuition. But just reading the text, where you get passages like I showed you, it seems to be not only soteriologically pluralistic, but suggests an ontological pluralism as well. It's simply a hypothesis, but I do wonder if the composers of the text were going in that direction.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, if I can offer a very brief comment, I mean, I think that it is interesting to me that Kṣemarāja and Abhinavagupta both have this, hierarchy of liberations. Like they're all liberation, but they're graded. It's not like some are definitely better than others. But at the same time, like they all derive their efficacy from a posited kind of monist ontology.
Yeah,
Um, and one wonders whether or not that is a genuine pluralism or not.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, yes. There are plenty of passages in the Netratantra which talk about parachaitanya and it talk about liberation becoming that reality. There are, and Kṣemarāja, of course, picks up on these. Now, Kṣemarāja is a non-dualist and he comments on the text. Why does he comment on the text? It's because there is an ambiguity in it, and he wants to pull it into his non-dualism, into his Pratyabhijñā reading, it seems to me, as he does with the Svachanda Tantra too. Um, but I think perhaps the, oh, I don't think it's a strong thesis I would want to present, but a weak thesis that there are sections in the text which seem to be ontologically pluralist and not only soteriologically pluralist. Although I hadn't articulated it in those terms uh, to Professor Freschi's comment just now, so thank you for that.
Okay.
What do you think?
Um, sorry, was that for Professor Freschi?
Yeah, I think so. I
Yeah,
think she was going to come back.
yeah, yeah. I don't know if I can unmute her or not. If oh, I can.
Yeah, th thanks a lot. That was a fascinating talk. I tend to think what Shashank said, namely that via different ways you get to a single
Yeah.
ontological monism. But I'm willing to be convinced.
Right. It's simply a textual point that within the text there seem to be passages which are more pluralist than non-dualist. But and that's one of the reasons why Kṣemarāja writes a commentary on it, because he doesn't want that.
Yeah. So in to kind of bring this to a sort of like I guess the contemporary frame, I see two questions from Amjol Shrestha and Sarah Taub that may not be like exactly related, but I do kind of want to bring them together because I think it'll help bring out the contemporary applications a bit. So Amjol asks, do you think the notion of bhāvabheda has a political concern, namely that of a cosmopolitan city-state that is rich in a diversity of practices and quote-unquote religions? And Sarah asks, does the text describe different types of liberation achieved by focusing on Sadashiva, Bhairava, etc.? Um, Presuming that you're correct that it states that different paths lead to different liberations. Like, is there some kind of express need to tolerate different liberations? Because it might be that, the Buddhists, even if you present some compelling vision in which the Buddhists have a place in this kind of ontology, the Buddhists are not going to be convinced about it themselves, but you still need to quote unquote tolerate them or include them somehow. So do you think
Yeah,
that's somehow at stake in the text?
that's a great question. Yeah, I think, yeah, I haven't talked about that, but you've got to see these texts in their kind of sits in name, in their situation, and who composed them and why. And I think, as Alexis shows, he wrote an article on religion and the state, in which he argues persuasively, in my view, that the Netratantra represents an entry of Shaivism into the realm of the court. So the Shaiva priest becomes the Purohita, the Shaiva, the king's chaplain. And this is important. And it does reflect a desire to include all divergent traditions within the state, if you like. So everything has a place within it, and I think that's correct. So you can read that purely politically. That is a reading. I think there are other readings. I think there are theological readings of the text as well, but certainly you can have a political reading in which the different. This is an attempt to incorporate, to give a place to different communities within the realm, within the kingdom. And that will be particularly important. Its connection with royalty is indicated, I think, by it being copied for Abhayamala or his son in Nepal.
Yeah.
Um, why did they copy that text? And there's one idea that his son was sick. I can't remember now. I think actually the text may say that. And Kirti it was commissioned by someone called Vishveshwara, who was an administrator in the court. And Kirti was the guy who copied it out. He tells us at the end. And he finished it on Saturday of the bright fortnight of Chaitra in uh, 320 or something. I can't remember the Nepal date now. So
Hmm.
yes, there is an interesting political reading, and Sardis an interesting article on that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it strikes me, I mean, it in a weird way, it reminds me of the last chapter of Manka's Srikantatarita, in which he's describing the assembly of scholars, and not all of the scholars are Shaiva. Like some of them are Vedantins. There are, um, but it's like a very sort of, and it's a very motley kind of group of people. There are people who are expressly Nyayikas. Um, so I wonder if like there is like, as you say, like there's a kind of political concern, and not to say in like in a sort of narrow kind of adversarial sense, but like there is like a genuine need to kind of
Yeah.
like how do we live with other people?
How do we
Um,
live with other people? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and that's like
And that,
that's in perhaps what's at stake. Um, uh,
and the
so
text, according to Alexis, it was really popular in the Kashmir Valley during sort of the 8th, 9th centuries, along with the Svatanda Tantra. So and that's interesting that it should have reached such popularity. I slightly doubt that in the sense that there's only 4 manuscripts have survived in Kashmir, and there's only this one manuscript in Nepal which was copied. There are other texts which have set bits of the text in it, but
yeah,
the natural um, uh, I've forgotten the name of it now. But anyway, so there are other texts with bits of the Netratantra in it, but there's
sure,
only one manuscript really, the oldest one, which has survived. So it stopped being copied at some point.
yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it would be interesting also to figure out whether or not like traces of the Netratantra's doctrines actually survive in later Shaiva tradition. Because I
Yes.
think the approach that like certainly like the Shaiva Siddhanta, and I'm told that Umapati has like a particular section on this on his Contra on the Paushkara Tantra, or the Paushkara Agama, where he is dealing with a very similar question, but like squarely within a 16th century Shaiva Siddhanta kind
Mm,
of framework. I
mm,
haven't read it myself, but I'm told that it's speaking to very similar questions.
interesting.
It but we do need to since we're getting close to the end of time, I do want to get to the last few questions. So I don't I hope I'm not cutting you off. But so this next question comes from Sauraditya. Um, Excellent talk, Professor Flood. It was truly enriching. My question entails textual influence. Do you think that the Netratantra, the Nepalese recension, was influenced by Tantric Buddhist tradition? The Shaiva exegete Jayaratha, for example, quotes the Heva Tantra excellentio in his Tantra Loka Viveka.
That's an interesting question. It could be, not to my knowledge, but certainly chapter 13, which has visualization of the Buddha, and it has seemed to have it seems to have some knowledge of Buddhist doctrine, but it doesn't. It's not polemical against Buddhism. So there could be influence, but I don't think so. But I'm not 100% sure of that, I'm afraid. It's not. We must remember it's not a philosophical text. It's a revelation, and it's a theological. It presents theological doctrines, and it presents visualizations and 3 different kinds of practice: a gross practice, which involves mantras; subtle practice, which is a visualization of the subtle of the sukshma sharira, the subtle body.
Yeah,
I think it uses that term, and the supreme meditation, which is a reinterpretation of the Yoga Sutras, of the yoga, the ashtangas, the 8 limbs of yoga. So I don't think so, but it could be. Sorry, does that satisfy your question?
I don't know if I mean this is a question from Sauraditya, so I don't know, and I can't quite see who they are on the.
But he or she is right that the Jayarata does quote, and Abhinavagupta, I think, too, quotes Yogacara texts, apparently with approval. I'd have to check that though.
Yeah.
I'd have to ask Alexis.
Yeah. So we're so I'll move to the next question then. So this I think is responding to Professor Fresky's earlier question. Isn't this distinction between pluralistic soteriology and pluralistic ontology simply an artifact of the imposition of linear time? In a perpetual cyclical interiorization of time, it is hard to find the distinction.
Mm, that's interesting too. Yes, so yes, those distinctions are indeed from perspective of linear time, and the Parachaitanya is in timeless. He's the Mrityunjit, the conqueror of time and the conqueror of death. So thereby is outside of time and death. So it seems to me that there is a distinction between ontology and soteriology, but perhaps from that absolute perspective, there is none. Because, well, from extreme non-dualist position, there is no time and there's nothing much is happening, I suppose, from an ultimate perspective. But certainly from our I think we can make a distinction, as Professor Freschi did, between soteriology and ontology. You could have a soteriological pluralism, which is ontologically non-dualist.
Yeah. This is sort of reminding me of the Utpaladeva in one of his stotras in the Shiva Stotrabali. He's describing Shiva as Sachara and Nirachara. That, you know, and perhaps as a kind of devote it does read like I think it's the Bhakti Vilasa Stotra, in which now that I'm thinking about it, Utpaladeva does seem to kind of have like a devotional kind of respin of the Netratantra in a weird way. Um,
Okay.
I mean, that's a bit of a side comment, but
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that, but yeah, I can't. Yeah, yeah, I'm sure you're right. Yeah.
So there's just one more question, and it's about the authorship of the Netratantra, and this is from Herco. If if the Netratantra would have been written by more than one person, could it be that it represents more of a pluralist view by
Good
virtue of
question.
being written by more than one person? But
Yeah.
I wonder how that squares with how the tradition treats it as revelation or as agama.
Seems that Kṣemarāja does treat it as revelation, but absolutely right. I think it was probably composed by different authors or perhaps a group of authors over a period of time. But nevertheless, whoever its final redactors were did give it some coherence. So there are certain themes running through it, like even the phrase bhāvabheda, which gives it coherence, and the three yogas of the gross, the stula, the sukshma, the subtle, and the para. Those three yogas, it keeps repeating them on a few occasions to kind of try to make sense of this pluralist text and pluralist practices that it's describing. So I agree with the questioner that it was composed over a period of time. Now, how we sort that out, how we identify the different layers of the text is an interesting question. And I don't agree with David on David White. He thinks that the earliest layers are the demonological layers, but I don't see why that's necessarily the case. They could have been added later. Certainly, the first two chapters seem to be different in tone, as Helen Brunner points out to the later chapters. So I think that is a task to be done, identifying different layers of the text. But its final redaction, I think it does make sense. There is a coherence to it, and there's what Ricoeur would call an intentionality to the text itself, independent of author's intentionality. So I think we can identify that. And I would like to see the text as having a degree of coherence and intentionality within itself, even though composed by a number of authors over a period of time.
Yeah. Yeah, no. It's yeah, no, there's a lot to think about. And it sounds like oh, I see a raised hand from Saraditya. This will probably have to be the last comment. Saraditya, I'll let you unmute yourself. Where do you go? Yeah.
No, I can't hear
I
anything.
don't see anything. Okay, we'll have to close here then. I don't see
Okay,
Saroj anymore, but I just
so
want to
this,
I just
go
want to
on.
invite Acharya Staneshwatimasana to kind of give his closing thoughts.
Ah, hello.
And Sara, sorry, I see you, Sara, at the end of the chat. You'll have to write it in the chat. So yeah. Acharya, please.
Namaskara. Thank you, Professor Gavin Flood, for your generous offer to come in Vimarsha platform and share your deep thoughts with us. I know you have always supported us from wherever different corners. You were actually the first one before I could see Mother Kali when she was in the making in Nepal. And now she's here in Long Island in New York. So in this transaction, what I am dreaming and what now collectively, if Vimarsha is beyond me, what we are dreaming is an integration or creation of a platform where the deep researches can go to a wider audience rather than being reserved to some elite universities where only a selected few can go and access to that knowledge. And we want to find all the ways possible to disseminate this knowledge globally as much as we can. And I seek your support in whatever form it is possible. And there is also a gap I'm sensing between so-called practitioners and researchers. I think it's a purely an ontological product of the colonial era. That so 25 years ago, I think one student writing her thesis under me, without me guiding at all, came up with this argument. What does it mean to practice Nagarjuna? So if I am I a follower of Nagarjuna? So what does it mean to follow Nagarjuna? So we have created the clubs, I think, for completely unnecessary reasons, because people, when they are looking for a comfort zone as a practitioner, what we are looking for is, if you critique some of the things we are unwilling to open up to the criticism, we will go to that corner and say, but we know it all because we are practitioner. And the same thing for the scholars. But I think these type of boundaries need to be dismantled, because if Shastric investigation were outside of the scope of classical Hindu practices, then these scholars should not have engaged in this type of open Shastric conversation. And why is this? What is even practice? Only wearing Tripundraka and some beads, is that what practice? But in terms of thinking, you may claim yourself a non-practitioner. When in the sleepless nights, all you think is Netratantra, because I can see for the 20 years you have been thinking about it. So what is practice? You know, it's a deep contemplation. So
That's right.
I really think that if we bring to the realm of rationality, because these things are slowly being misappropriated, and when we talk of misappropriation, we can always look into those outsiders, and we mean the scholars, but this is heavily misappropriated by even the very people who claim to be practitioners. We are here to open up to inquiry, and the truth shall prevail. And all these shastras have remained to be open to internal and external criticism, classically speaking. And I think that our duty lies in preserving that type of openness, because that, I think, is more important than simply wrapping up a book, throwing some flowers and rice grains and say, I'm a practitioner here, and don't know anything about it, because, this comes in my family. So we are working on it, but a journey alone is not possible. I saw Professor Elijah Fressy, Amjol Shrestha. Thank you so much for coming to the program, joining the program. I hope to see you with your own presentation one of these days. And I don't want to talk because the talk has been long. This is your day, but we are trying to create Vimarsha, not yet another commercial platform, but as a university teacher for more than 3 decades, and as someone who established Tantra department in Nepal, what I have felt is we need to create more educational platforms than the way modern universities allow education to flow through. And there was time when it was not possible, but today technology has made it possible that your words can reach to the entire globe, and that should reach, because these types of information, this type of knowledge has a deeper relevance, not to me, not just for a historical value, for the building, development of contemplative practices that we might find tomorrow all the more relevant as we progress in various aspects of human consciousness and medicine, and many aspects of mental issues and imagination, researches in memory and imagination, and all the different domains. Thank you again. Thank you, Shashank, and thank you all the friends who have worked so hard to make Vimarsha an alternative platform for university education. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Timosina. I agree with most of what you said, everything what you said. So let's hope that that Vimarsha has great success in the future. And your ideals and your goals are very close to some of our goals at the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies as well, wanting to disseminate knowledge and engage and intellectual engagement throughout the world, really. So thank you. And thank you. It was an honor to be invited to talk on your platform. Thank you.
Well, this is so great to hear a conversation between such esteemed scholars, and we Vimarsha are very thankful to all of you for making this platform possible. Also, your questions, your participation mean a lot to us. So thank you so much. And with that, we'll bring our program to a close. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.